Hi there and welcome.
You're listening to Animals and Us, Voices of a New Paradigm.
My name is Avantika, and I'm a researcher exploring animal consciousness, environmental sustainability, and planetary health. I want to help bring animal perspectives to the table and transform our relationship with the natural world.
And I'm Barbara. I'm an animal communicator and retired veterinarian. My true passion is exploring the hearts and souls of animals and helping people come to a much deeper understanding of who the animals truly are at their core.
This podcast is for anyone who loves animals and nature and has an interest in their own personal and spiritual development. We'll bring you powerful conversations with fascinating people about animal and nature sentience, consciousness, and communication.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey of love, respect, understanding, and care for the fellow beings who share our beautiful Mother Earth with us.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Animals and Us, Voices of a New Paradigm. If you're a regular listener here, welcome back. We are so happy that you're here. And if you're new to this podcast, we're so glad that we crossed paths. Today, I've got a special episode for you. Normally, we have conversations with guests that we invite to our show, but every once in a while, we also share recordings of when Barbara and I, have been interviewed by other people on their podcasts. So today is an episode like that where you'll get to hear the conversation that I had on a podcast called Spirit Doggies with Dani Fankhauser, who interviewed me about the work that I'm doing on intuitive communication with animals. She was really intrigued by the research that was happening in this field. And so in this episode, I talk about my journey up until this point in my life, doing research on this topic about our ability to communicate with animals, which was definitely not part of any plan that I had in my life. And I certainly didn't see it coming. But now that I'm here, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. And I'm so grateful to have found my way to this work. So sit back and relax, and I really hope you enjoy this special episode.
So welcome back to Spirit Doggies, Season 2 of the Dani Fankhauser podcast. I'm your host, Dani, and today's guest is Avantika Mathur. Avantika is an academic researcher with a Master of Science in Global Health, the co-host of the Animals and Us podcast, and is currently completing a research fellowship focused on intuitive interspecies communication. She's a trailblazer in the space, both in coordinating events and editing for academic journals on the topic. Avantika, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to dive into to your work. So I think it seems like an emerging space and helps to validate something that maybe has been going on for a lot longer.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly how I would describe it. I think honestly, a lot of people have very deep connections with nature, with animals. A lot of people feel things, hear things, see things that they just don't really have words for, ways of connecting with the natural world. And this work that's now just starting to emerge is really all about exploring that further and understanding it and trying to, share that with more people to normalize it really, that it's actually a lot more universal than we realize.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And that's a big goal for me with this podcast, even, is just to normalize it for people. When I first did an animal communication session for my dog, Bambi, I was afraid to tell people that I had paid for this because, and some people reacted and kind of thought it was kind of a joke and stuff like that. And then more and more, I started to talk to people who had done the same thing.
Absolutely. I remember the first time a few years ago when it felt like I was coming out in some way. I went on social media and I remember feeling so nervous sharing it with people that this was something I was interested in and I was going to start researching, and feeling so nervous about the feedback that I would get. And so yeah, I totally get it. It's new. Some people have heard of it, some people haven't. So it's an interesting time.
Yeah,
now.
definitely. Yeah, and so tell me about your background. Was this something that you were surprised that you got into, and how did you find your way into this?
Yeah, actually, I think the universe kind of led me into this. It sort of fell into my lap. I remember from a young age, I just knew that I would grow up and find a field to work in that really spoke to my heart, that would make me feel like, I'm doing something with a lot of purpose and meaning. And for years and years and years, I was fumbling around doing different things, which were all meaningful. My background is in public health, so I was doing research on like diabetes and heart disease prevention, and it was all meaningful work, but I knew that it wasn't mine. I knew that it wasn't really, I was involved with other people's projects, helping them reach their goals, but it wasn't something that was making my heart and soul like sing and dance.
Yeah.
And just knew from a young age that there would be something out there like that for me. But, the way school is set up and the way that, society kind of urges us to fall into these structures, there just wasn't any room to even, I was doing the best with what I thought I was good at and what I was interested in. So I went into like the sciences and I went into healthcare and all of that. And all of that was great, but again, knowing that it wasn't really for me. And then, I specifically remember like on my 30th birthday, I just put this out there. I was like, okay, I'm ready to listen. Like, just show me where I'm meant to be, and I will do my best to follow. So I was really looking for guidance. I was really looking for, an aha moment and something to make me feel like really inspired and connected. And it was shortly after that I must have heard, I think it was on the radio that I heard it for the first time, something about animal communication. It was about a woman who could speak to elephants. And she shared this story about how she had a group of elephants literally walk through a hotel in Africa. And I can't remember which country it was, but she used to take groups of people on safaris. And she had this very deep connection and love for the animals, and she could communicate with them. So much so that when there was a baby elephant in this group that was in trouble, a group of them like came and found her and told her that they needed her help. I mean, I'm paraphrasing the actual story. I remember hearing it. I heard it, and honestly, I was just like, huh, what? What what did I just listen to? And I think it just took me on this roller coaster ride, because the first thought that crossed my mind was like, okay, what does this even mean? Like, what is this possible? Like, somebody can connect with elephants in that kind of way and have this kind of two-way exchange of communication. And then the other thought that went through my mind was, well, why not? Like, why is it not possible? Why would I think that's not possible? It's probably because of I've never heard of this before. It's probably because of what I was taught in school. We're just not taught that something like this is even possible. So I was like, okay, I want to learn more. And I think maybe the researcher in me was just like, okay, let's dig into this and understand this a bit better. And honestly, the rest was just history, I think, because learning more and more about what it is that these people who say that they can communicate with animals, learning more about what they do, why they do it, and most importantly, what the animals actually have to share was just incredible. Like it was, mind blowing in the sense that I had never thought that this was even possible. This was never on my radar. But I was just so open to it, and it just made so much sense to me. And I think one of the reasons that, now reflecting back on it, one of the reasons why it probably made so much sense to me and really resonated with me was because there was so much talk and conversation about love and compassion. And that was really the foundation of everything I was hearing, no matter who it was, which animal. There was just so much empathy and love and compassion and talk about interconnectedness, and all of that sounded amazing to me. So I was like, well, why would I not give this a chance? And why would I not, look into this further? And, one thing kind of led to another. And I ended up meeting a scholar who is here in Canada, who is studying animal communication, who is, that's been the main focus of her research for the past 10, 15 years, is looking at what is this intuitive communication that people can do. Is it exclusive to some people? How do they do it? What are they finding out from the animals? What kind of skills are needed? What is the process like? And also drawing connections between those findings and Indigenous wisdom and Indigenous ways of knowing. Cultures all around the world, Indigenous cultures all around the world talk about these types of concepts and this type of interconnectedness and relationship with the natural world. So there were all these layers that, just started overlapping for me and really resonated, I think, also with my spiritual beliefs and expanded them even more, which I think I was so excited about. And so when I met her and I saw the work that she was doing, I was like, sign me up, like whatever you need a hand with. This is just so interesting. And I was still doing my public health research at that time, but I started finding that I was just gravitating towards this. I was like, okay, whatever you need done. And so I started working with her slowly, slowly. We started working on more projects. And then she asked me to coordinate this international symposium, basically an international conference about this topic. And it was just wonderful. And so I'm just at this really interesting place right now where I'm still learning. I'm still so curious, but I have this deep respect and passion for the research that's emerging, as well as, just having like heart-to-heart conversations with people and building community and showing people that, okay, this is something we're looking into. Research is going to catch up and we're interested in understanding this better. And then, of course, also building that practice for myself too. So that's, in a nutshell, what brought me to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like the way that you talked about kind of that early skepticism and yeah, just having kind of that scientific perspective of like, okay, yes, I haven't really heard of this before, but there is evidence for it. And as a researcher, I can look deeper. And so I'm also curious, a lot of people who are animal communicators, maybe a story I hear a lot is they grew up in a rural area. They went like walking by the stream and they just, always talked to animals and didn't realize that no one else was talking to animals. So do you have that kind of intuitive connection with animals, or did you have a different background?
Yeah, it was so different for me. A lot of people I meet in this work, they're people who have loved animals since they could like walk, and they've been communicating and connecting with the natural world. Their upbringing was, like you said, they've spent a lot of time outside. None of that was not the case for me whatsoever. I grew up in a very urban lifestyle. We were second generation immigrants. So like my parents moved to Canada in the 60s. And so I don't know. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was a cultural thing. Maybe it was just, where we were living, like the environment. For whatever reason, we had no companion animals I come from a very big family, like
Mm-hmm.
very large family, and there were no companion animals anywhere, like not even fish, nothing. And so I had very little exposure to animals. We also weren't out, camping and spending time outdoors. I didn't do any of that growing up. So I actually, grew up having a respect and appreciation for the natural world and for animals, but it was such a limited understanding, so limited. And it was when I met my husband, when we started dating, he told me, he's like, I adore animals. I love them. I have been bringing them into our home since I was a kid and driving my mom crazy. And, you're going to have to be okay with the fact that we're going to have dogs one day. And I said, okay. And, unfortunately, the lack of exposure also fed into like a fear as well, which didn't help. And I really think is just a lack of exposure. Had we spent, and I say we, like my siblings and I, all of us, I think we just didn't spend enough any time with dogs. So there was this fear of them as well, completely irrational, probably. And so, he tried to warm me up in all the years that we were dating. He tried to warm me up. He would take me to shelters. He would take me to different places, his family members who had dogs. And he really tried to help me see how lovely and wonderful they are. I tried. It was hard. I was still scared. But after we got married, about a year after we got married, he said to me, "Okay, it's time." It's time to bring home a dog. And I said, okay. I was like, I can learn and I trust you. And I just, I didn't have a good reason for saying no. So I said, okay. And I don't know, within maybe, I think a few months, we brought home a puppy. And this puppy, basically the person who had put the listing up had said, if you don't take him today, I'm probably going to leave him like at a fire station or something, because
Oh, wow.
needed to get rid of him, for lack of better terms, as soon
Mhm.
as possible, because he was starting to bond with them and they didn't want him. Their dog had basically had puppies.
Mhm.
So I was like, okay, we'll think about it and we'll get back to you. Like, no, you either take him now or he's going there. So
Mm.
of course I was like, okay, he's
Yeah.
coming. And everything changed after that. And that's when, that happened, and pretty much at the same time that this kind of other stuff started to develop, with hearing the thing on the radio, the story, all of those things started happening at the same time. And I realized, this is so interesting. I want to get to know him better. I want to understand him better. And so that is kind of where my practice started, my experience started, is when Simba entered our lives. And, in all the work that I've done, I've learned one thing, and I've heard this over and over and over again. I think every animal communicator out there who considers themselves like a professional animal communicator will tell you that it is something anyone can learn. And that these are skills that we all have innately, and that we're actually born with. Kids are so open at a young age, like they have access to all of these abilities. And then as we get older, we don't cultivate them. No one's talking to us about these skills and abilities. And so they fade, and we, enter a very structured, linear, kind of masculine type of upbringing, with the school system and everything, and no one's talking about any of these things. So we lose some of that. But every single person I have heard talk about this, no one is out there saying, I'm a gifted person, and this is my gift and nobody else has this. Like, every single person has said anyone can learn this, and at any age, and we're actually just like relearning. Like, we can all already do it. We've just forgotten or have never been taught how to access these things. So I've been practicing, basically, and it's become a way of life for me since Simba came into my life, and since I learned about the research. And I'm definitely diving into it more and more now.
Yeah. And so I want to hear more about the research, because I think a lot of people come into this sort of anecdotally, they have a friend who does it or something like that. But I don't know that anyone has kind of the bird's eye view that you took. And I think it can be so convincing for people to see that there are themes or commonalities among animal communicators in terms of like how they communicate and, like you were saying, what kind of information that they're getting. So tell us about that first study and what you learned from it.
Yeah, so the first project I ever worked on, and we're about to publish it soon, because research takes a long time, the whole process. So that first study was looking at websites and books of animal communicators, and it's a very introductory study because, like I said, it's an emerging field. So it's like a baby discipline right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that first study was really about understanding, who are these animal communicators? What backgrounds do they come from? A lot of people shared what educational backgrounds they come from, what degrees they have, and what disciplines. How do they work? Do they work remotely? Do they have to be there in person with the animal? What is their process like? So and then the books were really interesting. So that was the part that I was mainly working on then, was looking at the books and seeing like what kind of species do they talk to, and what are the themes that are emerging in the books. So, there were themes like animals as healers. Animal communicators talked about that, how animals can help humans heal. There were, themes about animals as teachers, teaching us certain things. There were topics about death and transitioning and euthanasia that a lot of the books talked about. We were trying to get an overarching sense of the profession, and we were looking at professional animal communicators who offer their services for a fee. Partnerships, do they work with like vets? Do they work with shelters? What kind of work do they do? So that was the first study, and that's really going to lay the foundation for hopefully other people to see that, okay, this is a thing, and this is what the research says about who these people are, and then find, interesting angles that resonate with them, that they're interested in finding out more about. Another study that we're working on right now is looking at what it's going to take to create a culture that is both transdisciplinary and transspecies. So I'll just talk briefly about what that means. So transspecies part is kind of easy. It's like, what is it going to take to create a culture where we can invite other species into the discussion and represent their voices as well? And the transdisciplinary part is, in this work, what we've realized is that people are coming into this and are interested in this. We call it Intuitive Interspecies Communication, IIC. There are people who are interested in IIC from so many different backgrounds and disciplines. So the symposium that we held had, I don't even know if we had to count how many different disciplines people came from, but there were people there from conservation backgrounds, from veterinary backgrounds, people who are in film and media, people who are in anthropology, people who are like just doing all kinds of different things. So we saw this community come together that was coming from so many different angles and lenses. So really what we're looking at is how do we successfully create a transdisciplinary and a trans species culture that acknowledges and brings animal voices to the table. So we're looking at some data that we collected at the conference from the participants who attended to understand like what's it going to take, basically. Like we are starting to recognize and acknowledge that this is a thing, that IIC is a thing, and we can see that there's this like global support and global interest in this topic. Well, so what is it going to take to get this to the next level where we can spread this even more and help people see that, animals have things to say and they want to share them with us. How do we receive that, and do something useful with it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm just thinking, I was on his Instagram today and saw like a video pop up like this 2-year-old's best friend is a crow. And
I just saw that.
yeah. But I mean, that's one of my favorite things to see is like, a dog and a cat that are best friends or just like these cross species. And so it's like, why do we not count humans as part of that, as being able to have that connection? And so kind of tying the two studies together, I'm curious, kind of going back to the first one in terms of, the literature review and seeing what professionals were saying. Because I think so often we sort of talk to animals as if they're babies, but to get to the part where we're looking for animals to kind of comment on these great world issues, what did you find that the animals were saying to the communicators that kind of set up to seeing that there was hope in terms of having these kind of deeper conversations with them?
Yeah, so actually, like one of my my podcast co-host, Dr. Barbara Shore, she's a retired vet, and she's been communicating with whales and dolphins and elephants and all species really for decades. And she wrote 2 books about her conversations with the whales and elephants specifically. And I'm just giving her as an example, like in her book,
Yeah.
asked them very specific questions about, for example, animal consumption. and that whole industry. What are their thoughts about it?
Mm.
Or, hunting, like what are their thoughts about it? Climate change, what do they think? And what do they need us to do, basically? So there's a lot of interesting information that comes through. Really, what I have noticed at the end of the day is that they are interested in helping us become better versions of ourselves. So it's like a process that has to happen like from the inside out. They don't necessarily come saying, you need to build this and you need to do this and you need to do that. It's not really like that. But what it is they really help us understand ourselves better. And I think that's also one of the reasons why I got so interested in this work, is because what they were sharing was that, humans are capable of incredible things. They acknowledge that, they know that. They know that we have this intellectual capacity to do things that no other species can. And so through the work, through the things that I have read that animal communicators have shared, like in Barbara's book, they really point out how important it is to use those skills and that knowledge and that experience to do good things and to make the world a better place. So I think a lot of, the listening to them in, issues that we want their input in has really to do with them encouraging us to step up and also become better stewards of the planet. They talk about how we have the ability to do that. We have that very important role in the grand scheme of things. They talk about how every species has a different purpose and different roles to play. In her book, she talks about the roles that whales have to play and the roles that elephants have to play. It's really interesting. And
Yeah.
so the
Yeah.
role that humans have to play is that we have to be good caretakers of the planet. So I think a lot of what they share keeps pointing back to that. I've also noticed that they have tremendous amount of compassion for us. So though they acknowledge and don't necessarily, they don't condone some of the things that we do with the exploitation of animals, they will point that out, that goes against the laws of nature. And so that's one of the things, they explain in her book and in other people's work, is why, it's not just about it being wrong. It's like, why is it wrong? And they explain that, it goes against how life is supposed to work, how nature is supposed to work. So they acknowledge that and they point those things out, but then they also tell us that, the animals also see the tremendous amount of good in us as well, and the love that we're capable of. And so they keep pulling us back to that. I've never seen them, point fingers and place blame and make us feel bad. I've never personally come across that. So much of it is like, you can do better than this.
Mm.
We know you can, and we love you, and we're all waiting for you to like wake up and to understand that what you do impacts us, this, and what we do impacts you, and we're all part of one entity. We're all trying to make the world a better place, and you can do a better job at that. So
Mhm.
that's a lot of what I've heard. There are a lot of practical applications of IIC as well. So, I have a colleague who was called, her and her team was called into a sanctuary where they were having a lot of issues with the animals, various unexplained issues. They had the animal communicators come in and try to understand what was happening. So, the animals would share with them what's going on, what's causing all these problems. I have another friend who is the co-founder of a large cat sanctuary in South Africa. So they rescue lions, tigers, leopards, and communicating with the animals is a fundamental part of how they do their work. So they will communicate with the animals at every stage of the interaction with them to ask them, would you like to come here? This is what's happening. We're going to be transporting you. Okay,
Mhm.
you have what you need. One of the examples she gave me was that there were two partners, and I can't remember which animals it was. They might have been lions, and one of them had passed away. And the staff was all thinking, okay, maybe we should rescue another lion. And there was a baby lion that they could have rescued. And they said, well, we got to ask the other one first. And they were assuming that she would be happy to have a baby lion, to keep her company. But she said no. She said she didn't want that. She wasn't ready for that. So then they made their decisions differently. And so there's so many ways that it can be applied and used. And one of the main purposes of the symposium was really to understand, like, how are people using this? Because there's been no unifying, body or place or community to come and talk about all of these interesting ways that people are applying this to their work, but it's happening. Like, we learned about people who are being called to deal with like pest control issues. People who want non-harmful methods, they've called her in to deal with like a scorpion issue that they had, or like mice and ants, and people who have issues like with their farms and wildlife coming in and killing their livestock. They'll call her in to understand what's happening, and she'll talk to the animals and get information. And so there's just such a wide spectrum of interesting things that can happen if we are open to the idea that the animals can share things with us.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's so amazing to hear those very practical examples. It just reminds me of, for the animal communicators, most of the ones I know work with people's pets. And so it's like, why is my cat peeing inside? It's just but it's just like that on a much larger scale. And you think of how much that impacts, safety and, our direct relationships with animals, the indirect, the way that we're just all connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And there, like, I think the change is going to be incremental. My vision and my hope for the future is that there can be a time where this is commonplace and it's normal. If we're making decisions that impact animals or impact nature, forests and, whatever it is, rivers, and that we know that we it's important to ask them, because we go into so many situations as humans thinking that we have all the solutions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm learning through this work is that if we are open to asking for support and guidance and insight on what they need, what they think, we can get that insight. And then the second part to that is, like, we have to be able then to implement it. We can't go out there and expect answers and then not do anything about it either. So there's a lot still to figure out, but I'm hopeful that the research can help support people that want to do this more and more so they can take it to the next level for themselves. I also forgot to mention your previous question about the research is one of my colleagues at the university. She's finishing her PhD. Her PhD focuses entirely on how animal communication happens. So like,
Yeah.
what is the mechanism? What is the process? How do animal communicators receive information, interpret it, and then convey it? So her thesis is almost ready, and I'm really excited to hear all about her work. But hopefully all of these different studies and angles of looking at things will be building blocks that will help people feel inspired to utilize this and reach out to animal communicators and give it a try.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I could see, in terms of like you're saying, starting to actually take action on some things. The questions people are going to have is like, well, how does it work? What's the mechanism? And so it's like, yeah, you're building towards that so that you'll have that ready to go. So I'm also a fiction writer, and as part of this podcast, I'm releasing a short story called Dog Deities, which basically kind of takes it to the other extreme, where it's a society where people outsource all of their decisions to their dogs. And they're not very good at actually understanding what the dogs are saying. So they kind of have that part missing. But I mean, the humor of it and, the way that I use fiction is sort of like to kind of paint a picture of a sort of utopia that gets people thinking like, okay, maybe we don't quite want to live in like this fictional world, but like, does that at least give us some ideas of better ways that we could be living? So it's really interesting to talk to you because I have a line in there that basically one character says like, oh, we're not going to solve climate change with our dogs. And, it sounds like they actually could be part of that. So a little more real and a little more optimistic than I had even predicted. So I want to switch gears and talk a bit about your pets now, because you went from having the one dog and now with all you know about animal communication, how does it play into the way that you relate to your pets?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing it has done, like I said, it's become a way of life for my husband and I, in the sense that, now that we have this understanding that animals are thoughtful, intelligent, compassionate, wise beings, that I think first and foremost in this home, we don't see ourselves as, like, we never use the word pet owners. We don't even use the word pets really, because we see them now as being equal to us, and we see them as being their own unique beings that have a lot to share with us. And of course they have their quirks, and they're in their cat body or in their dog body, whatever it might be, but so they have those instincts and they have those behaviors that those animals do. But there's a certain level of appreciation for going beyond that and understanding that there's a lot more to them than just that. So I think when we think about decisions that impact them, when we think about what they need and what they want, we kind of default to thinking about, can we ask them? Can we ask them what they want? Or how can we facilitate that conversation? Just to give you a really practical example, last year in August, we had really bad wildfires here where we live, the worst that they had been in like 20 years. And we happened to be away that exact week. We were in Toronto for 2 weddings, and it happened like the day that I left. And we were like devastated, right? Because I mean, it was hard knowing that our city was like literally up in flames, but it was even harder knowing that our animals are there. What's going to happen to them? Are they okay? Like, it was like black outside. You could not go outside, but dogs have to go outside. So the sitter was taking them for like really short periods of time. And we were so just, I couldn't function mentally. I was thinking about them so much. So we had a friend of mine who's an animal communicator, and I have the great privilege now doing this work of knowing so many brilliant animal communicators. And I asked her to check in with each of them. And our cat was separate from the dogs because she was staying at home. And we had our neighbor coming and checking up on her. So they weren't even together. And so, that facilitated this entire discussion where we got to tell them, okay, we're trying to come back. We're going to come back as soon as we can. How are you guys doing? What's going on? And they literally painted a picture of what was going on. And my friend who was doing the animal communication, she's in like a totally different part of the world. Like she's doesn't know anything. She's not there. She actually didn't even know that the animals were separated, like that our cat wasn't with them. But she told me, she's like, it almost seems like Fiona is in a different place than the dogs. And I was like, yeah, that's right. So she was painting this picture for us, and that just gave us so much comfort, all of us, so much comfort, because they're like, where did these two people go? Are they coming back? What's happening? So I think it's just become a way that we do things and we interact with them, and we don't assume that we have all the answers for them either. And for me personally, I think beyond all of that, I've learned so much about a lot of spiritual concepts with animals. I believe in karma and reincarnation and souls and soul contracts and all of that kind of stuff. And when I learned about animals and their spiritual lives, it was like they're all part of that as well. So I think beyond everything else, I see them as having a very important role in my life as, as my soulmates, and as as having important contracts with them, and having maybe been together with them in previous lives, and doing work together in this lifetime that we all agreed to doing. So, beyond just communicating with them and that being part of our daily lives, I think a lot of it is like appreciating them and honoring them for their spiritual journeys that they're on, and understanding that we're all doing our work together.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love hearing too about like the idea of reincarnation and soul contracts. I definitely felt like a meant to be connection with my dog when I adopted her. So that resonates with me as well.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that in the books, a lot of that in the websites of animal communicators. It comes up over and over again. I think a lot of that, and that was one of the reasons I was so excited about this work, because all these things that I have believed and learned about in such human-centric ways, and now all of a sudden it was like, oh yeah, animals have souls, they have soul contracts, they reincarnate. I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. Like that's so interesting and so fascinating. And there's just so much more to them than I think we realize, and more than we might ever know and find out, no matter how much we study this or understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it sounds like there's a lot, like you said, research is slow, but there's so much in progress that's coming out. So what are some of the things that you're most excited about? And what should we sort of stay tuned for?
Yeah, I think I'm excited for people to feel validated in the experiences they have and feel motivated to continue doing this work, and I'm also really excited about people teaching this to their kids. And, I think that if we, my logic and my theory is that I think if people understand animals better and understand trees better and plants better, that we will treat them better. Because I think once you understand them on a deeper level, and you appreciate with them and you connect with them in a way that resonates with you, that naturally you start showing up differently in the world around you. And that's really what happened with me. So I really hope that people see this, and that they keep an open mind. I think that's a big part of this work. Is I understand that it's hard to wrap your head around. I totally get it. And I've had many conversations with people who are like, I don't understand it. There's no research. It doesn't exist. And I love having conversations like that, because I get it. I get where they're coming from. And so I kind of chip away at their logic little by little, and I poke holes in their ways of thinking. But I think keeping an open mind, just because we don't understand something, and just because there isn't research or evidence out there yet, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So I hope that more and more people continue to catch on, they stay open-minded, and that it really shifts the way that they show up in the world and how they see themselves as being part of the natural world around them. And they start treating, animals and nature with more respect, and try communicating, because there's so much that happens on a very deep, personal, intimate level when you have that kind of communication yourself. And like I said, they're there to help us. They're there to help us learn how to love more, learn how to be more compassionate. So I really hope that people give it a try. And there's so many resources out there on how to get started, and there's an abundance of that kind of information, and YouTube videos and Instagram accounts and all of that. In terms of what to stay tuned for, I would love people to if they're interested in this and this resonates with them, they're curious, to follow our podcast, and follow me on Instagram. That's really where I'm going to be sharing more and more about all of this, and all the developments, all the different work that people are doing. And we also are going to be all the work that happened at the symposium. We're also going to be finding a way to make that publicly available, in terms of like who was there, what the different presentations were about. So I think if people are curious about the work, they can definitely check that out as well, and keep an eye on those scholars that they're interested in, keep an eye on that research that's going to be coming out soon. And yeah, just keep your eyes and ears open for more people who are going to start talking about this.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, so we'll have links to all of that in the show notes so you can get connected and and stay tuned. And I just wanted to say, like, as we're wrapping up, I love something you said about, when people understand animals better, they'll treat them differently. I think it's such an optimistic point of view because with so many problems that we have in the world, there's a lot of like, it's the corporation's fault, or like people need to, stop using plastic bags. And it's just very overwhelming, like all these different rules and trying to pass blame and stuff like that. What I get inspired about is kind of like you're saying, is like you understand something differently, or like you just have a vision of a different world, and that naturally brings about different actions, which makes a huge change.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is optimistic, but I really do believe that. I think that's one of the things that attracted me to this work is that it is so, it doesn't play on fear tactics. It doesn't make
Yeah.
you feel bad because there's so much of that out there.
Yeah.
You can just open up any news channel or social media platform, and there's like an abundance of, all the wrong things, articles about all the wrong things that are going on out there or that we're not doing enough, right? And so there's already plenty of that kind of anxiety and frustration out there, and definitely a lot of, finger pointing. But I truly believe that that change has to come from inside out, that each of us has to find our own truths. We have to do the work ourselves. The more we do that, the more we naturally will become better versions of ourselves. And the hope is that that trickles. Like, I don't think, even if the big corporations and the governments made big decisions, like the people are still going to do what they do. So
Yeah.
really feel like, of course, both things need to happen at the same time. But I feel like it's so powerful when we try to make change on a very individual level, because it has a ripple effect. And it's also
Mm-hmm.
because, I'll never go back to being how I was before. I mean, I'm not saying I was bad or like, but I'll never go back to those old ways of thinking or not knowing, because now I know a new way. So it's also sustainable. You're not doing like telling people to do something that they might try for a bit and then be like, "Oh, okay, whatever." No, this is not really like that, because once you see a tree or a squirrel or, a river or, your own dogs and cats a different way, it changes the relationship forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And then that continues to ripple out. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. It was great to have you. This is an amazing conversation, and I'm so excited to keep following along as you release more research.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me here, and I thank everyone who listened, and I hope that we all continue to feel inspired and motivated by the natural world. Well, that was the end of my conversation with Dani Fankhauser on the Spirit Doggies podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And as always, we want to end with a blessing for the animals.
We'd like to end this podcast by taking just a moment to be quiet. And we give thanks and blessings to these amazing animals that we share our lives with. They give us so much and ask for so little in return. We hope that you can keep the animals and all living beings in your heart and in your mind as you go about your day. Thank you so much for being here with us today.